and you figured out what it is you're going to say in your speech and what you're going to focus on, you now want to really give some time and consideration to the delivery, practicing and preparing for your speech. And the delivery is just as important, if not perhaps even maybe more important than just coming up with the content, because the delivery is what's really going to bring your speech alive. It's what's going to get your audience members' interests, and also it's what will determine whether or not they remember all of the good information that you're sharing with us. So delivery is really important, and we're going to spend some time looking at the different aspects of delivery that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. So before we get into those different aspects, I want to share with you the Nixon-Kennedy debate. And you probably studied this in your high school classes. It's a really good example of the power of nonverbal communication. So as the story goes, those who listened to the debate on the radio had thought Nixon had won. Those who watched the debate on TV had thought Kennedy had won. And it all came down to nonverbals. So Kennedy displayed really strong what we call immediacy. He smiled a lot. He communicated warmth through his nonverbals. He had really good eye contact with the camera. So people perceived that he had the stronger performance in the debate. Nixon, on the other hand, was very serious. He did not display as many immediacy characteristics. He didn't smile very often. He had poor eye contact. He would do kind of the shifty eye thing where his eyes would go back and forth. He didn't seem real comfortable. He had this awkward kind of sitting stance, gestures, and he had actually just gotten out of the hospital. He had been sick with the flu. He was running a fever during the debate, was even kind of pale. The producers wanted to put makeup on both candidates. Kennedy said, okay, I'll wear some makeup, where Nixon said, no way, I'm not wearing makeup. So that actually contributed to him not looking as well. Kennedy had just gotten off vacation, so he had a really nice tan. He was looking really attractive. So all of these elements worked together to really influence the perception that the audience members had of both of their deliveries in the debates. So we're going to look at characteristics of effective delivery, starting with eye contact. This is probably the most important aspect of nonverbal communication. If you can think about having a conversation with a friend or a family member, have you ever had a time where someone just didn't really give you eye contact? Maybe they were looking at their phone, or maybe they were just kind of spacing out. It can be really frustrating. It can feel like they're not really connecting or tuning into what it is you have to say. So as a speaker, it's really important that we have good, strong eye contact. And when we're speaking to an audience, you want to try to make eye contact with every single member of the audience for a couple of seconds throughout your speech. So you're not just scanning the audience the whole time while you're talking or staring intently at one person in the audience. Instead, you're going to be looking at one person for a couple of seconds and looking at another person for a couple of seconds, so that every single member feels like you're connecting with them, just like you do in a conversation. So if you're talking to a couple of your friends or some members of your family and you're telling them a story, you're going to look at all of them as you're sharing your story, just like you would in the classroom. So you want to really pay attention to your eye contact. Now, of course, it's going to be different online, where we've got the camera, and that's how we're connecting and relating with our audience members. So you want to work to look at the lens as you're speaking. Try not to look at your picture as you're talking, because then your eye contact won't be direct, or looking above or away from where the camera is. So when you're speaking online, try to look at the camera lens, and that'll make it feel like you're connecting and making eye contact with the audience. Movement is another thing you want to think about in your delivery. Give some thought to your movement. More movement can add engagement and what we call dynamism, energy to the speaker. So movement is a good way to also reduce some nerves that you might have. Gestures can kind of help get some of that shake. If you have shaky hands, sometimes gesturing can help reduce some of the shaking hands. But there are movements that can enhance your speech, and then there are movements that can take away from your overall delivery or performance. So effective movements include gestures. If you were in the classroom, you might want to change position while you're speaking. You also see that with people who do TED Talks. They don't just usually stand on one spot on a stage. They'll move from one side of the stage to another, but purposefully. It's important to practice it and plan out those movements. Otherwise, we might do some movements that we didn't necessarily plan on doing that can take away from our speech. Think about your posture. If you've never thought about your posture, this is a good time to start to think about it. Do you have good, strong, confident, stern posture, or do you tend to kind of slouch your shoulders a little bit when you're talking? So you want to work on having confident posture. Talk to your friends, your family members, kind of look at yourself in the mirror and see it if you're communicating confidence and strength in your posture and the way you carry yourself. Ineffective movement includes fidgeting. Sometimes we have a tendency when we get nervous to do these things we call adapters. And adapters are mannerisms or behaviors that we carry out to kind of make ourselves feel a little more comfortable. So it could be like playing with your hair, or adjusting your glasses, or adjusting your clothing. So it's usually some sort of self-soothing that we do. And it sends a message that we're nervous to the people who are watching us. And it comes across as a bit awkward when we're speaking. So you want to be aware of any of those ineffective movements that you're doing. And sometimes we do this, we're not even aware of them. So it's good to practice in front of others. And when you're practicing in front of others, ask for feedback. Am I doing any adapters or mannerisms or movements that could be taking away from the delivery of my speech? Your facial expression is another thing you want to think about, and it might sound kind of silly because we don't usually think about our facial expressions, but when we're giving a speech, we want to make sure we're communicating the message in a way that is consistent. So if you're talking about something that's really serious and sad, you probably don't want to have a smile on your face. On the other hand, if you're talking about something that's fun and exciting like traveling or going skydiving, you want to show that energy and enthusiasm through your facial expression. So pay attention to what you're communicating with your face. If you have a really stoic, serious look on your face, you might want to try adding some facial expressions to add and enhance the delivery of your speech. You want to think about your voice, another thing that you probably haven't thought about before, but your voice is a really important part of your delivery. So if you're monotone, it's going to be really hard for us to listen. We've all heard those types of speakers, and it's really, really boring. Your brain just wants to shut off and tune out. So try not to be monotone. And the way you do that is by varying your pitch up and down, not always having the same tone, practicing with your rate and your volume. You can kind of go lower and go higher. So basically changing it up a bit as you talk to keep us interested and engaged. So volume, articulation, pay attention to the pronunciation of your words. Make sure that you're effectively pronouncing all of the words in your speech, that you're taking time to enunciate. Sometimes when we are nervous, we speak a little bit faster, and as a result, we lose some of that enunciation. So practice saying the words completely. Try not to skip the end of a word, which we do sometimes when we speak really quickly. Pay attention to your speaking rate. If you tend to speak really fast when you get nervous, practice your speech, really being aware of your pace and making sure that you're talking at a comfortable rate for both you and for your audience members. Personal appearance, of course, is important as well, because you're going to be kind of setting the tone for your presentation based on the clothing that you're wearing. Credibility can be enhanced when we dress a little bit more professionally. So you send the message like, hey, I'm taking this serious. I care about the presentation. I care about the way that I look. I also want you all to feel good and confident. So whatever clothes you have that make you feel your best and are also going to enhance the overall impression that we get from your delivery. So you want to avoid wearing clothes that look kind of sloppy or that have a message that could be distracting us as you're giving your presentation. Solid colors, darker colors tend to pick up well on the camera. So kind of just give a little extra thought to what you're wearing when you're presenting your speech. So we've got 4 different methods of delivery, and we're going to talk about each. Do you know which one we're going to use for your speech? Did you say extemporaneous? Those of you who are keeping up with the reading, you probably knew the answer to that question. Good job. So when we think of extemporaneous speaking, we're basically thinking about speaking conversationally, and I'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about why we're not giving a manuscript speech. So manuscript speech takes place when we just read our speech off from a script. It's boring, it lacks connection, immediacy, it doesn't come off as genuine, and so please don't read your speeches off to us. There are a few instances where someone would need to speak in a manuscript style, and they would have to really practice it in a way so that it doesn't come off as if they're reading. So please just, we're not going to do manuscript, no, just reading your speech off to us. Next, we have memorized speaking, and this is the most difficult style because we're having to remember every single detail of our speech and memorize it word for word, which takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of effort. If any of you have ever done a theater performance, you know it takes months and months and months for everybody to get their lines correctly and to remember all the things that they need to do and have it come across through the memorized style. We don't need to put that pressure on you. We don't have that much time in this class for you to really have to memorize your speech. So we won't be doing the memorizing. I have really been impressed by some students who have tried to memorize their speeches and presented them in that fashion, but oftentimes what happens is they come across as sort of robotic because the student is so focused on trying to remember all of the information that they're really not able to connect with the audience, and they tend to lack those nonverbal communications, the facial expressions, the immediacy. So you can memorize parts of your speech, like if you want to memorize your attention gainer, or if you have a quote that you want to remember, or a statistic that you want to make sure you get right, you can memorize those parts of your speech, but you're not going to want to memorize the whole thing in its entirety because it will disrupt the overall flow. Next, we have impromptu speaking, and this takes place when you have little time to plan or prepare, and you're asked to give a speech. So maybe you're at work and your boss says, hey, how's that project going? And you have to kind of put together a little message that sounds good and that's going to impress your boss and demonstrate all of the hard work that you've been putting out. Or maybe you're at a wedding and you've been asked to give a toast. Uh-oh, you didn't plan or prepare. So there are some things to keep in mind if ever put in this position, which pretty much chances are high that you probably will one time or another have to give an impromptu speech. So try to, if you can, take a couple minutes to scribble down some notes. Think about the structure, intro, body, conclusion. So in the intro, I'm going to introduce myself or introduce the topic. Body, what's the content they're wanting to hear from me. Conclusion, make sure they know when the speech is over. Whenever you can, and this goes for all speeches, use your own personal experience. That's going to enhance your speech because we love to hear about each other's lives and each other's experiences. And oftentimes that's what we're going to remember when we see a speech. So add your personal experience when you can. Answer the journalistic questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how. This will get you thinking about what you're going to need to talk about. What are the expectations of the audience? What are they going to want to hear from you? Who is involved? Who is your audience? Stay positive. A lot of times speakers will kind of get back from the audience what they give. So if you're real negative, you're going to kind of, and you're putting off this negative vibe like you don't want to be there, you're going to get that back from the audience. On the other hand, if you're really enthusiastic, energetic, and positive, you're also going to get that back from the audience. So try to be positive. Plus, as we learned in the beginning when we were talking about public speaking anxiety, if we're knocking ourselves down and being negative, it's going to be much more difficult for us to project confidence and really perform to the best of our abilities. So try to stay positive. And then last, keep your comments brief and to the point. Just because you've been asked to speak or share some information doesn't mean that you want to rattle on and on and on and on and go further and talk longer than the expectations of the audience. We've all been in those situations, and you lose your audience when speakers do that. So avoid going on beyond what the expectations are of the audience members. So last, we have extemporaneous speaking. Like I said, this is a conversational speaking. This is genuinely the way that we communicate when we're talking to our friends and family members. So we want to recreate this when we're giving a speech. And it comes across as if we didn't plan or prepare, but really it does take quite a bit of time in planning and preparing and working on practicing the speech. So when you're practicing your speech, try not to say it every single time the same way or memorizing it word for word. Instead, use your notes to guide you through the process. So you're going to focus on your introduction. What are the points you're going to make in your introduction, and then focus on your body. And in the beginning, you'll use your outline quite a bit. But then as time goes on, you shouldn't need as many notes because you're going to know that information. You'll be able to share what your points are without having to memorize it because it's in your brain. You've got it in your long-term memory. But don't worry about getting every single single word perfect. It's not about giving the perfect speech. I don't want to see perfect speeches. I want to see genuine, real, honest speeches. And if you are practicing in this conversational tone, you'll be able to accomplish that. So steps to practice, steps to follow in order to practice: talk through your entire speech so that you can get comfortable with the wording. If you find there's a word that you're struggling with or having a hard time pronouncing, change the word or change the phrase. Say it so that it's something that you can feel comfortable with. Practice the speech several times in full. The rule of thumb is about 10 times. Record your speech. Record yourself speaking. It's always good to kind of see and hear the way you look. You might notice things that you do that are great. Wow, I didn't realize I was so good at making eye contact. Or I didn't notice I was so good at articulating. Oh, wow, I'm talking a little bit fast. I need to slow down. So recording your speech really is a good way to get a sense of your strengths and then also things that you can work on to improve your delivery. Practice in front of others, it's quite different. Practicing in front of a mirror versus practicing in front of actual live audience members. So I encourage you to do that as much as possible. Since we're doing this online, I want to also give you some tips to keep in mind while you're preparing for presenting online, because it is a bit different, as you all know. Try to have a clean, clear background, something that is going to enhance your speech rather than take away from it. Curtains, a wall, a door, those are all great backgrounds. Avoid having the light behind you because it tends to cast shadows and make it difficult to see your face and your facial expressions. It works better if you can have the light in front of you as you're speaking. Avoid being real close, putting your camera right up in front of your face like you're doing a selfie, because then we're not seeing your gestures and your movement. So try to at least show the top half of your body, so if you're gesturing, we can see your gestures as you're speaking. Don't read your speech off to us. Instead, try to communicate more extemporaneously. You can use 3x5 note cards. Those are great because you can hold them in your hand and they're not distracting if you need to look down briefly and think about what it is you're saying. Practice speaking conversationally. So think about how you talk in an everyday conversation and try to carry that on to your speech. Sometimes speakers have a tendency to totally change their tone and it comes across as disingenuous. So try to speak more conversationally as you're giving a speech. Make direct eye contact with the camera. We talked about that. And do at least watch your video once before posting, because there might be something in there that you're doing that's taking away from your speech that you didn't even realize you're doing. So please watch your video at least once before posting. You might even want to record it a few times and get the best recording before you do your final post. Last, I want to talk to you about visual aids. You should all have at least one visual aid in your presentation, and you can decide what's going to work best for your particular topic. If you want to put it on a document or have an actual physical item that you're going to share with us to illustrate what you're talking about, you could show a video clip and include a link to the video clip along with your video. You could post a PowerPoint slide. But the idea with the visuals is to enhance your speech, to help us better understand what it is you're talking about. So it shouldn't be like a pretty collage in the background as you're talking. You should actually physically talk about the visual aid. So like if you were discussing a place, you might want to show us on the map which place you're talking about. If you're discussing statistics, you might want to show us a graph on a PowerPoint slide to give us an illustration of the statistics that you're discussing. So depending on your topic, you will use visual aids differently, but keep in mind they should be enhancing your speech. Your speech should not be a slideshow presentation. That's a little bit of a different type of speech, and that's not what we're focused on for both the informative and the persuasive speech. So instead, just one visual in your speech, taking no longer than a minute of your speaking time. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to getting to see your speeches soon.